ask ourselves the question, how do the different schools of thought, how do the different thought define law? What do you mean by schools of thought? We usually call them school of thought slash jurisprudence. School of thought slash jurisprudence. How do the different schools of thought slash jurisprudence define law? Specifically, we are going to interrogate the natural school, positivist school, natural school, and Marxist school. I want to encourage all of you to participate and ask as many questions as you would. If you want to, please just interject at any point of our discussion. You're allowed to interject and ask me any question you have. Thank you so much again. Please note that I had an internet challenge a little bit, but if I drop off, if I drop off, I don't have. I was trying to reach out. It seems that I didn't save the number of your class reps because I was trying to reach out to them earlier on to tell them about the challenge. Please, before even we go any further, I want the number of all the module leaders from BBIT ICSA. Can I have the number of the ICSA module leader here in the chat for everyone to see? The module leader for ICSB and the one for BTC, kindly. I remember you guys introducing yourself, but I'm not sure whether we exchange numbers. It must be that I didn't say. Even before we go any further, please. Students, can you hear me? Or I've muted myself? Oh, okay. Odiero Roseanne, thank you so much. ICSB. Let me write it down. It has costed me. I remember I was chatting, but did I save the numbers? No. Odiero Roseanne. And the rest, please. 0748 15 30 55. So please, for the rest, also give me your numbers because I can imagine you might be having different channels of communication. It's just that you have a combined class here. Uh, module A, Module B, we have Module A, the class representative. Who is the class representative for Module A? And BTC, please send your numbers. Rebecca, come again, Rebecca, please.
No, I was just saying it's me.
Rebecca, give me your number. Rebecca, you're texting me your number on the chat, I hope, eh?
Yes.
Okay, so Rebecca, please text me. BTC, do we have one for BTC, please? BTC, send in your number. In the meantime, we'll start the class. Sorry, I was also hoping to have a guest lecture for your class. So I've been trying to call this guest lecture to find out if he will pick my phone call, but he has not picked my phone call. I've not been able to find him on the phone, so he might drop in any time, and then I will allow him a bit of time to just have a discussion with you about the nature of law. But in the meantime, we'll continue. However, as I was just checking whether he has responded to my message, I have seen this Eliud. Dear all, Eliud Chemweno, an MBA 2015 alumnus of Stockholm University, is running 100 kilometers. I'm wondering, is it possible to run 100 kilometers? Ultra marathon along Nairobi bypasses in support of Strathmore University, Kenya shilling 50 million COVID-19 educational relief fund. What? Okay. I've never heard of someone running 100 kilometers. Okay. The poster is a bit small on my phone. That is going to run within Nairobi. Sunday, support each kilometer run by donating to M-Pesa, number, student support, and then the foundation. Okay. I wish it was possible for the rest of you to join as well. So, nature, purpose, and classification of law. The first question we're going to ask ourselves, what is law? The answer to this question, what is law, is boils down to one thing, that there is no universally accepted. For you to really understand that sentence, you have to dig deeper to law as a discipline. You have seen how progressively different disciplines have developed and come up in our society. In the olden days, for you to be a doctor, you did not have to go to the medicine school to learn how to be a doctor. You learned to be a doctor by apprenticeship. You could be with a doctor, you see what they do, how they conduct, how they treat patients, they expose you to their medicine. It is only until some centuries, of course, many centuries ago, that now there's a lot of formalistic learning. Even what you're doing now is a formalistic based learning. But is formalistic based learning developed because of disciplines, and it also has developed as a business where you offer certain programs, you have certain content you want to expose the students to, and you call it a discipline. So traditionally, if you look at you go to the disciplines that used to be there, you'll find that there were very few disciplines that were taught formally. Most of the trades that we have, trades slash professions, people could acquire knowledge by apprenticeship. You act as an apprentice for a very long time. Even lawyers, we called it clerkship. So you become a clerk to a lawyer, and after a while, you're given that right to practice yourself. But all that has changed in the light of modern education. But there'll be more changes post. I don't know if there'll be a post, but after with everything happening around us in the world, I think there'll be a lot of changes as far as approaches to education are concerned. I was already seeing this platform that has been created by University of Pretoria of allowing for any school of law in Africa that wants to hold a seminar to do it on that platform, and then other students from other schools can join and contribute to the platform after a formal announcement. Now that is law as a discipline. Mostly, if you go to University of Nairobi, which has the oldest law school in Kenya, you'll find that the Law School of University of Nairobi is part of a college known as College of Social Sciences and Humanities. Social Sciences and Humanities. Apart from the College of Social Sciences and Humanities, you'll find that there are many other colleges and schools per se, and even programs within the whole structure of the university. When you go to engineering, you go to School of Engineering. And at School of Engineering, that's when you'll do all your electrical, you do your electrical and the rest of engineering programs. So, so that's how disciplines have come to grow. Okay, it was very easy when you're doing pure sciences. You're doing physics, you're doing chemistry, you're doing biology. So those were regarded as pure sciences, and most of the principles that you learn under these sciences, they are irrefutable. They can be demonstrated by way of evidence. and most of us are witness to it. We are able to, when we have this gift of life, we can see the sun rising from the east and descending from the west. So, but when it comes to social sciences, it depends on the society. The meaning attached to disciplines, this concept, depend on the society. They're so fluid. They change for every society, and that's why we always start off with a caveat that there is no universally accepted meaning attached to law. Not in the case of physics, where you can define molarity, and the definition is same everywhere in the world. Not with biology, where you can define osmosis. Your definition of osmosis in Kenya will not change when you travel to another country, or it will remain the same. But when it comes to the law, you have to understand the law depending on that society where the law applies. For them, what is the understanding of the law? So universally accepted meaning attached to law. The meaning attached to law depends on one's theory of knowledge. Okay? So theory of knowledge is very important for you to learn. Ideology and the general philosophy one subscribes to. So, what do we mean by theory of knowledge? What do you mean by ideology? And even general philosophy. What is your philosophy as an individual? What do you stand for? Okay, here in Kenya, you find most people don't even have a philosophical identity. They will always align themselves with anything as long as there's money. Even when it comes to matters political parties. Of course, we always complain that one of the problems we have in our country is that political parties do not have an ideology. And like when you go to the US, you're either a Democrat, and as a Democrat, you know the values you're standing for, liberalism, and as a Republican, you know that you're conservative and you have a conservative viewpoint of the world. So all that comes to philosophy, theory, ideology. They are very, very good words for you to know. For you to be a good researcher, you always need to understand the theory of knowledge, not just the practice of it, not just applied knowledge, but the theory of knowledge at a very abstract level. So that determines how you define the law. Indeed, this is what has led scholars to find the definition of law difficult because theories of law begin from different premises and therefore they're non-comparable. So if you lean with this theory, you might not as well agree with someone else who lean on the other theory. And here you're not going to focus on the general theory of knowledge, but I will challenge you if you don't have an idea, go read on it. But you're going to focus on the theory of law. Our discussion will narrow down on the theory of law. So, coming back to this question, what is law? There are a number of factors that determine the definition of law. A number of factors. So that's why we don't have, because how you define the law will also be influenced by these factors here. The first one, and they're not exhaustive, they're just illustrative. The first one is that usage of words. How have these words been used? Words have different meanings in different circles of thinkers. So, how you use the word law, okay? You come to Kenya, you say law, people will have a certain understanding. You go to, where is this country called? You go to Riyadh. Okay, Riyadh is the capital for. Riyadh is the capital for which country? Saudi Arabia. So you move to Riyadh and you say law, they will not be able to understand you clearly. Most likely, when you say Sharia, Mzuri David, how are you? Okay, please. Thanks, Waweru. At least you answered my question. I was almost now coming up and saying, "Oh, no, who no, no one doesn't know the capital of Riyadh." But thank you. That is our guest speaker. He said he might drop in anytime. He's en route, so he will let me know when he can drop into class. Um, so usage of words, we've said when you go to Saudi Arabia, Riyadh, you mention Sharia for the law, they will look at you twice. For them, they have a different mindset of what the law is. They have the Quran, they have the Sharia, the way their Quran has been interpreted and codified, so that they use the Quran to interpret most matters law in their daily relations. Which other country has a different set of law? I think mostly the divide is usually between, those who follow strictly the Sharia law. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Go to Swaziland, uh, the capital of what is the capital of Swaziland? Is it Lesotho? Or is it? Yeah, I think it's Lesotho. So go to Swaziland and try and tell the king there, King Riyadh. Oh, asante sana Ayane. Of course. See Riyadh. Okay, thank you so much. And the capital of Swaziland, Lesotho, am I right? Please correct me as well if I'm not. Let me see. Sorry, should not. Bambane. Lesotho is also a country on its own, eh? Thanks, Rebecca. So you go there and you start explaining to them. You see, as law is a government made law, you find that they follow a lot after their cultural, they follow after their customary practices. Oh, distract- oh. So you'll find that they follow a lot after their customary norms. Okay, for them, their customary norm is so important. While us here in Kenya, we rubbish our customary law, we look down. I need to switch off this phone, although I also need it. We look down on our customary laws. We don't follow our customary laws. Some of us will look down on those laws. Okay, for good reason, for sure. I will not stand here in class and defend female genital mutilation and say it's a good customary practices. But I don't think because some of our customs support female genital mutilation is a good enough reason to rubbish all customary laws. Not all customary laws are archaic and harmful. So for them, they treasure their customary laws. Even here in Uganda, you go and you can still visit the Buganda Kingdom and see how there was that organization right there. So that tells you the usage of words is different in different societies. Definition of law also depends on the function it is given. For us here, we are taking a functional approach in defining IT and business law. Why are we taking a functional approach? We are looking at a specific type of law and the function it plays and how it applies in respect of a certain profession. So that's why we even call it computing or IT law, and we want to focus on that. So it depends on the actual functions of the words used. Precision may not be attained, but an approximation may be useful. Next is definition is also dependent on ideological conception. And today, as you retire to bed, I want you to think about your ideology. What do you stand for? What are you ready to maybe not die for, but to defend vehemently? Okay. So ideological conception is very important. And that's why sometimes we need to introspect and find our own biases and prejudices. And really have a critical view of our thoughts as well. It is not just you criticize how other people think, but you yourself, your thinking is also skewed, yet you don't critique how you think. So you need to be able to have to understand what is your ideological conception or attitude. If you don't have that, I am so sorry. There's no need for you to have a degree. University education should be very theoretical, and though we are also trying to make it as practical as possible, but theory has to be there. That's why everyone always says, oh, you're going to university to learn about theory. And when you graduate, people respect you that you have power to read. Like you're a person who is interested in knowledge and passion for knowledge. So it is not just a matter of, oh, how can I create a database, or how can I form a new software? How can I program a new software? How can I install uh, or do ABCD? But it's also about how does these programs work? Yeah, why is it that if I combine this code and this code, I get this result? What happens if I was to combine this something different and this different? Why does everyone use this operating system and not the other? What are the, it's just having that knowledge for the sake of it, having that understanding before you come to that practical application. That's what university knowledge is about. So please try and think about what your ideological conception is. Um, then there's nothing, I don't know. I think that's why I'm a teacher. Most people, when they come across, when we interact, and they tell me, oh, why are you not a practitioner? You know, oh, why are you not practicing law actively? I practice on the periphery when I have to defend my family members and friends and things like that. You go to court and appear for them. But I always interact with such questions. Oh, why are you not practicing? Why are you not? Yeah. Why? Ah, okay. So asking what I stand for. I don't know. I have that question is for you. Don't redirect me to me. Me, I know where I stand when it comes to legal philosophy and my theory of knowledge and relativism vis-a-vis absolutism. So that's the thing. The people who just love knowledge for, they just like to have that knowledge and understanding, and to have those lofty discussions, to understand Plato and Socrates and their approaches. So, just loving knowledge for the sake of knowledge, and for the sake of understanding, and for the sake of engaging in lofty arguments, and that, and there are people who don't, so it's fine. So ideological conception. Definitions of law depends on its specificity or generality. That's another factor. Some schools of thought have defined law to even include customs. So you can try to be very specific, you can try to be very general. And we've just gone through a number of factors, not all of them, just illustrative to show you that there's so many things that come into play when you are attempting to make a definition of law. Okay. And therefore, in order to obtain an objective theory of law, one has to embark on the study of the nature of law, the theory of law. This is known as jurisprudence. So my colleague is not even my colleague, because he's Dr. Ngira, my invited guest who have had us to come and speak. He has a lot of passion for jurisprudence, the theory of law. He teaches jurisprudence, and he does a lot of research on some of these questions. So for you to understand the concept of law, I want you to think of a figure I want you to form a picture in your mind. Picture that you're having a book, and the book is titled Law, and then you want to dissect it, yeah? To dissect it and to understand really what is this concept of law. Okay? What is a concept? So when it comes to understanding law as a concept, an idea. A concept is an idea. So if you want to break down what this idea is all about, so you have to dissect it and come to the root of its meaning. Law, the nature of law, very intrinsic study, not just superficial understanding of what the law is. So that's what we call jurisprudence. Had you been in law school, hey, let me tell you my experience with jurisprudence. I was in Moy University. I don't know if I've told you that. That's where I did my LLB. My lecturer for jurisprudence is, or was, because I'm not, is Mr. Sifuna. Mr. Sifuna was one of those feared lecturers in Moy University. There was a lot of stories and rumors about how malicious he is. I'm not sure whether he is. I always don't believe stories that people pass down unless I have an experience myself. So, have you ever entered that class and you already have a lot of fear because of what your predecessors have told you about a certain class and even about a certain subject? So you just get into it with a closed mind and say, oh no, can I really understand jurisprudence? So, to be honest, very honest with you all, I studied jurisprudence for 2 semesters, but I couldn't even make the head and tail of it. He was not as a good. He's now a professor. I hope I can meet him one day. He was not a good professor. He didn't. He could teach very short classes. Just come, say words, tell us about John Rousseau, tell us about Austin. But this he could not connect these ideas for us. Me, I left jurisprudence class not really understanding what I have studied. But it is now when I have come to I have had to teach myself jurisprudence, because you cannot escape jurisprudence as a lawyer, especially if you're an academic and you're doing research. So I had to, in fact, I wish I was in class. I could show you my text. I had to, unfortunately, photocopy a text. I'm not always proud of photocopying books because you deny the author money. It's just that there are no copies being sold in Kenya, and just start reading jurisprudence for myself and understanding its root. Because even when you're doing research, okay, you have to always understand the theory of law. It is such an important study for lawyers. But for you guys, it is just to help you not have a superficial take of law, to just understand law in a very inner perspective. The definition of law depends on the school of jurisprudence. So, jurisprudence, what is jurisprudence? What is jurisprudence? Let me play a short video for you that will introduce you to the world of jurisprudence. And so let's take let's play a short video now. I'll stop sharing so that I can introduce you to jurisprudence. What is this animal we are calling jurisprudence? Okay, give me a quick minute. I retrieve the video. And as I retrieve it, I can already explain it to you. Juris, law, knowledge in the longest time. Law, knowledge was propagated in Latin. I don't know if you've ever attended a Catholic mass in Latin. Oh, I tell you, it is an experience in itself. So you'll even find there are still churches that read mass in Latin. Everything used to be in Latin. Latin used to be like English. The way like English is widely spoken is the same way Latin used to be widely spoken then. And even books were written in Latin. So they had to be translated in English at some point when the English dynasty took over and was ruling everything. So juris is derived from Latin. Even in law school, we still read certain terms in Latin. So juris itself means law. Jurisprudence means prudence, science, the science of law. Okay, have that in mind as you watch this video. It's a 5 minutes video. Please do not go and cook popcorns and don't go away from your phone or your computer. Whatever students are doing when you are teaching them online. Okay, jurisprudence, an introduction. Please be attentive. When you're at home, it doesn't mean that you're watching. Sometimes students unmute themselves and you can hear a movie in the background. That sound of a movie, an action-packed movie. So you're wondering, this student is in class and they are here watching an action-packed movie as well. But the best thing is that don't harass students. Mm, you don't harass students to that they have to study. The life, unajua asiyofunzwa na mamao ufunzwa na ulimwengu. Life just has a way to teach you. Even me, when I waste time, I still pay for it because I will have to invest another time to learn what I should have learned then. So let me play the video. Before I play it, I need to share. Okay, and give me a minute. I'm going to mute myself for a minute just to get used to it. I'm working from home. Mm. Okay. Ein Moment, bitte.
Jurisprudence. My name is Professor Nick James, and in this series of 5 videos we will be looking at some foundational concepts in jurisprudence. Jurisprudence is...
Sorry about that.
Hello? Hi, Ma, how are you? Everybody's okay?
Oh, my dear.
Oh, okay.
That means my internet.
Welcome to Introduction to Jurisprudence. My name is Professor Nick James, and in this series of 5 videos we will be looking at some foundational concepts in jurisprudence.
I'm in class right now.
Jurisprudence is the philosophy of law.
Okay, see you.
In sociology for you. But for my class, I will not be able to teach you all these 5 schools of jurisprudence. And I'm not teaching it in depth. I'm just explaining it very briefly. So we are going to start with the natural, we come to the positivist, and then we go to the Marxist school. So coming to the natural school of jurisprudence, what is it all about then? So the natural school of jurisprudence is where the natural school of jurists have attempted to define law in universal terms. I hope you can hear me and I have internet. There are times when, as a lecturer, you talk for hours, but you'd already been dropped off the class and the students cannot even hear you. But I'm hoping you can. Give me a quick minute. This might be call by our guest speaker. He's not Mr. Hey, I can even be arrested and put in prison, and the key thrown away. He is Dr. David Ngira. Just to give you a brief of his background, Dr. David Ngira is both a lawyer and a sociologist. So he has the benefits that I don't. Okay, I am not a sociologist. I'm only a lawyer. So he comes from a very rich background of understanding even how the law applies in society. Secondly, he's also he teaches at um, Mount Kenya University, their School of Law. Okay, he's a senior lecturer at Mount Kenya. There has been a lot of move to. Do you know? Have you ever had people being headhunted? Dr. Angira is one of those people who are usually headhunted by schools of law. In fact, there was a time you were headhunting him to join the SLS program. So he's very widely sought after, and he's also very outspoken. You'll notice that. So he recently completed his research in Netherlands. So I will allow him. I don't want to take any further time, but I will invite him, please, to take it over. David, just to give you an orientation, we were just starting to discuss the different schools of jurisprudence. So maybe you can just take us through and share with us your thoughts on this. Thank you so much. Karibu, Dr. Ngira.
Thank you so much, Mercy, for the excellent introduction. I feel really, really honored. For those who don't know, Mercy has been my friend for a long, long time. We met in the UK. We doing masters in the UK at the University of Warwick. He was in Glasgow. I was in Warwick. Then I went to proceed to do a PhD. She's proceeding to do a PhD soon. Now, she invited me. I don't have any writing, anything. I'm happy she has something here written, which is really, really cool. So she wanted me to kind of just introduce the concept of law and the question of jurisprudence. Now, for a long time, law, and she also told me I'm talking to business law students, not bachelor of law students. So I'll be a little bit more, I'll try to break down the concepts as much as possible. Now, so for a long time, law was not really studied in the university. Law was studied through apprenticeship. When law finally, when through apprenticeship or some form of training. Now, when law became a subject matter of university training, there was now an attempt to study law using the instruments or tools that had dominated other social sciences. And so, the consequence of introducing law into universities many years ago was that other methodologies that had been used to study social sciences were developed to understand and study the law. So if you look at the various definitions and understanding and approaches to study the law, either emerge from philosophy, from religion, from sociology, from political science. They kind of tend to emerge from other social science disciplines that have a much longer history than the study of law. So law has been here since time immemorial, and there is no time that humanity has never had law. But the academic study of law as we understand it now, not very old. And that is why you have all these various approaches to understanding and studying the law. Now, that said, the definition of what...
Dr. Ngira,
yeah?
Let me interrupt you a little bit.
Yeah.
I want to give you the host right so that you can share your whiteboard. You can share a whiteboard and maybe just write 1, 2, 3 things if you need to.
I just came. I don't have anything to write. I'll just speak.
Okay, Sawa.
And I don't have anything to
I think I'll be your secretary. I'll be writing what I feel the students should note down.
Okay, good.
Asante. Okay.
So in that context, the question of what exactly is law has then preoccupied the study of law itself. There have been different approaches to what constitutes law. Now, the most basic understanding is that law is a system of regulating human conduct. But that definition raises a couple of problems for us, because a system means that it has different compartments or components, because it is different components that constitute a system. Now, so that definition then raises a problem, because sometimes law does not necessarily exist in a systemic context. And so some people then proceed to define law as a set of rules through which a society is governed. So if you look at the systems definition, the systems definition is associated with scholars like Tabner, Gunther Tabner. I think I may need your screen now, Mercy, because I need to Gunther to write what the spelling of Gunther. Yeah. Mercy, I am trying to find.
Can you do this? Just when you have that pen, you can click on text. Just click on text, and then it will allow you to type on the whiteboard.
Okay.
Mm.
You know, we usually use Teams, so I'm not used to this. Okay, Ganther Tabna. So Ganther Tabna is associated with the systems approach, the law, and a guy called Niklas Luhmann. So they see law as a system of rules through which a society is organized or governed. Now, this systems approach of law presumes that there are interconnected components that then constitute a particular framework of regulation. So there are certain people who don't think that it explains the nature of law because there are certain laws that don't exist within a systemic context. Now, therefore, other scholars, and specifically Lon Fuller, considers law to be the mechanism of subjecting human conduct to rule. So Fuller's definition of law is that law becomes a mechanism of subjecting human behavior to rules. Now, who can tell me the weakness with this definition? I'll answer that for you. If we say that law is simply a mechanism of subjecting human conduct to a certain set of rules, then what that means is that when footballers play football, and there are certain rules indicating this is penalty and this is offside and this is this, then the conduct of the footballers is being subjected to a set of rules. So if we adopt Fuller's definition of law, then even the rules in sports essentially constitute law. And so some people have a big problem with this definition on the premise that it widens the rules so much. If your father says no entering this house after 7 p.m., in the eyes of Lon Fuller, that is law because your action is being subjected to a set of rules. So this is a problem with this definition. We already saw a problem with Luhmann's definition of considering law as a certain system. Now, some people then say, and specifically Herbert Hart, that law is basically the unity of primary rules and secondary rules. If you add primary rules and secondary rules, you find what we call law. Now, let me tell you what primary rules are. Now, primary rules are those rules that tell you what to do or what not to do. So the Traffic Act, the Penal Code constitute primary rules, the psychotropic and subs. So any law that tells you do this or don't do this, in the eyes of Hart, is primary rule. So laws that prohibit murder, laws that prohibit theft, laws that prohibit rape are all primary rules because they tell you do this or don't do this. Now the second category, for those COVID-19 regulations, all those ones in the eyes of Hart, primary rules. Now the second category of rules are secondary rules. So secondary rules provide a mechanism through which primary rules are made. That is, so through which primary rules are made, through which primary rules are changed, and through which primary rules are recognized. So the rules that establish the judiciary and judicial promises, establish the judiciary and judicial processes constitute secondary rules. The rules that establish parliament and guide the operations of parliament are primary rules. Are secondary rules. The rules that determine how constitutions are to be changed or other rules are to be changed constitute secondary rules. So secondary rules are rules that speak about the enforcement, the making, or the changing of other rules. Those are secondary rules. Therefore, in the eyes of Hart, those rules that you usually find in the Constitution, the rules that speak about the functioning of judiciary, functioning of parliament, functioning of executive, as well as becoming the process of changing primary rules, they are called secondary rules. Rules that speak to you as the citizen, such as the rules that say do not kill someone, do not steal, do not rape, do not rob. Those rules you as a law is the use. Anything else that falls outside that is essentially social behavior. Now, any question up to that point before I proceed? Okay.
Please ask questions. Ask questions. I don't want Mr. Ngira to report back that, hey, the class was not, active. So msini let down. Ulizeni maswali even if they're not relevant. Rebecca, uliza swali.
Could you repeat what the primary rules and the secondary rules govern?
Okay. So Hart, and we look at the different schools later on in a short while, and you will basically understand this a little bit more. So Hart actually sees law as being basically rules only. So laws are simply rules. And there are two sets of these rules, what he calls primary rules and what he calls secondary rules. If you look at Fuller's definition, you realize that it is open enough to include things that are not necessarily rules, such as the football regulations or the rules you have in your house, which are not made by any given authority. But Herbert Hart sees law as being purely state-based rules. And so there are either primary rules or secondary rules. Primary rules are kind of laws that speak to the citizen. They tell you, do this or don't do this. You know, when Constitution establishes legislature, it is not speaking to you. It is speaking to government on how the government is to organize itself. When the Constitution establishes judiciary, it does the same. It establishes structure of judiciary and tells us how the judiciary is to operate and the guiding principles. When the Constitution, but when you look at those rules that tell us how other laws are to be made or how other laws are to be changed or how other laws are to be recognized are secondary rules. They would ordinarily then be found in the Constitution. Now, the second category of rules are what we're calling the primary rules. These are rules that speak to you. They don't talk about anything about other rules. They speak to you. They tell you, don't steal. And for example, the penal code. The penal code has punishment for different criminal offenses. So it will tell you, don't steal, don't kill, don't do this, don't do this. Those rules that speak to you as the citizen are primary rules. You see, primary rules are made by Parliament. When Parliament is making rules, Parliament itself has to comply with certain laws.
Don't have anything
Those laws that Parliament has to comply with when making primary rules are called secondary rules. When interpreting primary rules, let's say you've been arrested for theft.
Yeah, is that 11 or 4?
I hope none of you has been arrested for theft here before.
Next one.
So when you are arrested for theft and you are taken before the judiciary itself is established by some rules. And the judiciary itself will deal with your issue based on some rules.
Yeah,
those rules that guide the judiciary in resolving your case are secondary rules. They include rules that establish the judiciary, and there are certain rules of procedure such as civil procedure code and criminal procedure code. They guide how exactly the process of resolving the dispute is conducted. So the rules of judicial procedure are called secondary rules. The rules that guide how parliament makes law are called secondary rules. The rules that determine the process of changing the constitution or changing any other rule are secondary rules. Now, that's another definition of law. But sometimes, let me give you a scenario, a case scenario. Sometimes in 1906, a man called Palmer was the grandson of a very rich man. And this rich man in the United States wrote his will. And in his will, he gave most of his property to this guy called Palmer, who was a grandson. And then a little bit of the property that was left, some a quarter of the property, was shared among 5 daughters. So most of the property, 2/3, was given to Palmer. The small bit was shared among 5. So Palmer was the grandson. Now the daughters went to their father to complain that it is impossible for you to give almost all the property to the grandson while you are leaving us with only a small portion of the property.
Hello.
So the grandfather listened, and then the grandfather decided, look, I will change my mind about this thing. Maybe I need to rethink how I allocated property. So they were involved in some conversation with the daughters. And as they were involved in some conversation with the daughters, Palmer passed by and overheard the conversation. A will had been written and deposited with advocates.
Yeah.
But Palmer overheard this conversation between the grandfather and the daughters. So Palmer that night decided to poison the grandfather because the grandfather was going to change the will the following day. So Palmer poisoned the grandfather that night. Now, the law of succession in the United States requires that property must be shared, succession must be done based on the will. But the will here gave Palmer most of the property. Palmer now killed the grandfather by poisoning him. So Riggs, one of the daughters, went to court to claim that Palmer should be barred from inheriting that property. If you are the judge, what would you say? Because here there is a law that says divide this property based on the will, and there is a will. But now Palmer killed the grandfather after the will had been written down. Riggs has gone to court to say Palmer should not be allowed to inherit. If you are the judge, what would you say?
Let me find participants. I'll start with Samuel. Samuel Mulwa, please give us your thoughts. Samuel?
Okay, so I will just let Palmer inherit what.
Hey, sorry. Me, I'm protesting loudly. Why? Why am I protesting? Oh, we have raised hands. Let's see. Munyui Julie. Munyui Julie, please.
Hi.
Hi.
I will also give the property to the grandson because that is what the law states.
Yeah. Diana Biambo, what do you say?
I think I'm judged based on evidence. There is evidence from the law that says that inheritance should be given in accordance to the will. So I'd also judge in favor of the grandson.
Motanya Isaac.
Okay, so for me, okay, yes, there's evidence that succession has to be based on the will, but is there evidence that is there non-coming evidence that the son actually killed the grandfather? So if there's actual evidence on that, facet of view, I'd also try to weigh the situation. But like by default, I'll just give the grandson.
Okay. So in short, Isaac, you'll follow the law to the letter.
Uh, uh,
And just
No, not blindly. If someone comes with evidence that the son might have had a hand in killing the father, well, we can look at that. But I'm not like blindly saying, no, the law says succession has to follow the will and all that. So I'll have to look at what's at the ground, what's at my hands at that particular point in view. So has someone come to complain that does someone have substantial evidence, not just rumors and hearsay,
Okay. At least you'll weigh your decision on evidence. Stacy?
Can you hear me?
Yes, Stacy, we can. Thank you.
Okay, so I was thinking ideally laws are created to create are made to create a just environment. So if a law being followed to the letter would make it unjust, I feel like there should be some leeway to have another way to handle it. So in this case, if there was evidence presented that the grandson had a hand in the death of the grandfather, then having him inherit all that property would not be just. So in that case, I don't think that I'd follow that law to the letter.
Thank you, Stacy, for your contrary view, which I support. I hold the same view, although the other views are also correct. I'm not saying mine supersedes. James Boro?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, James.
I would rule in favor of Palmer because in this case, the situation plays a very important role. Because when the grandfather was making the first will, the first copy of the will, he was saying in the sound mind. So the fact that he didn't manage to change the will, okay, I just say that's too bad for them. And in this case, the daughter is taking wants to bar Palmer from the will, not because she has evidence of him killing the grandfather or anything, just because they think it's unfair. So yeah, that's my choice. That's my opinion.
Oh, thank you so much, James. Thank you for all those contributions. Wow, that is heartwarming. Thank you for that. There are others in the chat. I'll quickly read them and then give to David. Give it to Palmer. That is James. James has already spoken and said why. Newton, make the judgment in favor of the daughters if evidence is valid. Wambua, Rebecca, it's only fair to go according to the law, so give the grandson. Amani Newton, give the property to the daughters. The way Dr. Ngira has put it, it means that there's evidence of the grandson killing the father. And me, where do I stand? I stand with this Amani Newton. I think maybe because I have a bit of succession background knowledge, but I stand with the view that the grandson, if it is proved that he indeed killed the father, should not be given the property. Let's hear from let's have Dr. Ngira wind up that discussion. Back to you, Dr. Ngira.
Okay, so this case, now maybe I need to clarify two things here. This case raises two issues, a criminal issue and a civil issue. The criminal one is the question of killing, which was settled because this guy was already found guilty of murder. So that was a different case. Now the next question was the civil dispute over the inheritance. The judges claimed that, judges ruled that as a matter of principle, you cannot benefit from your wrong. So then the idea that you cannot benefit from your wrong influenced the development of succession law around the world from 1906 today. But even now in Kenya, if you found to have killed your benefactor, then you don't inherit property. But all these developments in law somehow have been strengthened by this jurisprudence from the US. Now the key thing is, let's look at
and
this.
David, Dr. Ngira, please allow me to interject at that point, because a case in point is the Cohen's case. I hope you all remember the headlines just I think early in the year or last year, about Cohen. This the lady Cohen who was murdered by his wife. The wife was called Sarah.
Yes, Sarah Wairimu.
It's called Sarah. So the argument was, could Sarah inherit all that property that Cohen owned? And once Sarah was proved that indeed he participated in killing Cohen, we have a law in place that says she cannot inherit. It does not matter that she is the first in line to inherit as a wife, but we usually say you cannot benefit from your a killer cannot benefit from the act of ending another person's life. Yeah. So thanks.
Exactly.
Dr.
And so the judges developed a principle here. There was no other law anchoring this principle. They said, as a matter of principle, you cannot benefit from your wrong. And then they enforced that law onto this, rather applied this to this situation. But the question here is, do you think the judges used law by saying that you cannot benefit from your wrong? Because this was not written anywhere. They then went ahead to pick it up and use it. It is a principle. They picked it up and used it in this case. Do you think the judges in this case used law? If you were in that court that day and then you are going home to report, you say the case was resolved on the basis of law, the judges that came up with some ideas and then used it to dispose of the case. Abecha, what do you think? Abecha James.
I don't think they use written law, but probably like a sense of morality in this case.
Mm-hmm. Abat Kivuguto. Abat Nathan. Okay. Now, this brings us to this. I'm seeing another hand here. Who is this? James Boro. Okay. So this brings us to the second issue. Some scholars argue then on this premise that law constitutes rules and moral principles. So that the idea that you cannot benefit from your wrong is a moral principle. So in some way, there are moral principles that essentially constitute law. But some moral principles have been used for a long time and have essentially been accepted, and they're sometimes called equity. So there are principles of equity have been used over time. They constitute the law. But there are certain principles that judges use, the moral principles that have never been used before, that judges simply reference to resolve issues that emerge. So some scholars then argue that law is not just rules, law constitutes rules and moral principles. So that if judges run out of rules, they can reference moral principles in resolving legal matters. So you could use the rules, the principles that have gained judicial custom that have been used for a long time, such as principles of equity. But then there are also principles that have never been used that judges develop in specific context to dispose of specific cases. So some scholars argue then that those principles that judges would develop to deal with specific case scenarios also constitute law. So within this context, people argue that law are the rules and moral principles through which society is organized and or governed. Any question up to that point? Now, having said that, there is what then distinguishes law from non-law. Now, before I get to that, I've got two participants raised. I'm seeing two hands. Waweru Madenge and then James Boro. Waweru, you got a question?
Okay, thank you. So I have a question on how do you outline, then in this case, how do you outline morality? Because they can just say it, but of course morality has a certain standard. It's not just to be one person can have a different morality from another, or probably they can think about it the same way. So or a different way. So how does that work? How does morality work?
Excellent question. Now, I'll answer that question in two ways. Rather, two answers exist for that question. Now, there is what we call deontology. Now, deontology presumes that there are certain actions that are right in and of themselves. So, in determining what is moral or not, you ask your question, you ask yourself whether this is the right thing to do or not. So it must be the right thing to do, and it must be done in the right way. Those two components constitute what is moral in a particular context. Now, morality, I must add, is contextual. So that what is moral in one place is not necessarily moral in another place. That we will have to have a certain jurisdiction for what is moral in a given context. Now, so deontologists believe that there are certain things that are inherently right, and there are certain things that are inherently wrong. So, if you ask someone why incest is wrong, if you were to undergo vasectomy and your sister was to undergo tubal ligation and you decide to get married, you will never have any children. So, the argument that you will give birth to children with defects doesn't apply. There is something that will still be wrong with incest, right? Rather, with the marriage between you and your sister, which then is what constitutes a moral issue, which then raises the moral issue. And so, deontology presumes that when you unpack certain actions, you find certain things inherently wrong with those actions. And that constitutes what makes them immoral. Now, the opposite of that is associated with is called what we call consequentialism. Consequentialism proceeds from the assumption that if you want to determine whether something is moral or not, you have to look at its outcome. So if the outcome is good, then that action is good. And if the outcome is bad, then that action is bad. So consequentialists determine morality of actions or inactions based on the outcome. Now let me give you an example, a real example. I used to have this friend of mine who was dating some guy. And the guy was such a big liar. Of course, many men are liars, many women. But this man was a particular unique breed of liar. So the guy was a security guy in a bank. But the guy pretended all through that he was a banker. The guy had a rich brother who used to work for the UN. He works for the UN up to now. And so he was always traveling around the world. So he had a house here, was not married, he was always traveling around the world. So his brother, who was a security guy, used to live in that house. But he used to lie to this girl that he is a banker. The girl, being a student, would never know because the girl would visit him for 2 days, for a weekend, and go. And he would ensure anything to do with his clothing, the watchman clothing, the security clothing is kept away or taken to Adobe or something. So this girl got pregnant in this relationship. And this girl now wanted to move into this house. Now, around this same time, the brother now decided he was going to settle down. So he wanted his house. Now he would be staying there with his wife. Now he wanted to get married. That means the brother, who was a security guy, had to leave. So the brother now, due to some other alcoholism and all these factors and depression and frustration, got into alcoholism, was sacked from his security job. So he went back to Migori. He went with this guy. It is then that the girl realized that actually this guy was not a banker, this guy was just a security guy. They are married up to now. The girl dropped out of school. The parents of the girl said they cannot continue paying school fees for a parent. The girl gave birth to a child. So, of course, it is some form of logic that a parent should not be compelled to pay school fees for another parent. So, the girl dropped out of school. The girl is married to that guy up to now. I don't know whether they're back in Nairobi, but the last time I checked, they were living in the village now. Now, this guy got a wife, right? He lied, but through his lies, he got a wife. Do you think that his lie was wrong or right? Because if he had said the truth, he would end up with no wife. At least he wouldn't get this one. So, do you think his lie was justified? because the lie produced a wife. What do you guys think?
Hello.
Yeah.
His lie may not be justified, but also raise the question to the lady: did she fall for the bank or did she fall for the man? So I think the lie was justified also at some point.
So the lie was justified.
Yeah.
Because it produced a wife.
Exactly.
Okay. Waweru.
Yeah, I don't think it was justified. Yeah, it was what's it called? I wouldn't say lying, but okay, I've forgotten the term. However, I think we can go with that. Yeah.
Okay, you think it was not justified. James Boro.
Or can we have Salome Chamiat if James is not speaking yet?
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi.
Honestly, I don't think the lie was justified because then it means that everybody has to lie to get a wife, and that's not true. Because
Okay.
people who are watchmen still get wives.
Yeah, but they don't have to lie about it. My view is this: the end does not justify the means. But you can also hear from who else? Okay, I will try and give everyone who has raised their hands a chance without compromising on time. Very quickly, Waweru. Waweru, you have already spoken, haven't you? So we have Diana in that order: Diana, Rebecca, and Isaac. Please.
Okay, for me, I think the lie is not justified, but it's convenient. It was convenient for him to get that girl, maybe because she was from a certain class and she was beautiful in his eyes. So he saw that the only way of getting her was through the lie. So I think it was more of a convenience for him. So okay, so let me just say it's justified.
Personally, I think it was unjustified because the basis of that marriage is wrong. The girl was probably thinking, okay, I'm marrying, let's say, a banker, and maybe that was something very important to her, and she didn't get what she bargained for. So I think that's the foundation of the whole thing was a lie. That means that, yeah, I think it was unjustified, in my opinion.
Okay, for me, I feel like it was justified because the basis of a relationship is not occupation. It's, are we compatible? Do we love each other? So I feel like it is justified because this lady did not marry this guy because he's a banker, really. No, it's because, oh yeah, I feel the vibes and you're also a banker. I think that's my opinion.
So David, quickly, I'll read some of the contributions in the chat as well, so they're not left out. So just the same view as Isaac. Yulia says, but their relationship supposed to be based on love or occupation. I think it's just like again, Newton can't justify that, but can't blame the man entirely. The lady should also do research. Don't believe what you see. Miriam, it was not justified. He may have just concealed the truth. Amani again asked, what if the roles were reversed? Jessica, the lie is not justified. It changed the girl's opinion. Chemiat, a relationship should be built on lies as well. Okay. Momani, not justified. A legitimate reason to fulfill a duty is not to forsake it, and so it goes. So maybe you can stop there and you can let David continue.
Yeah. So a deontologist would say that the lying is wrong in and of itself, regardless of what comes out of the lie. In other words, even if somebody was to come to your house running and say, thieves are chasing me, and he was to enter your house, and those guys chasing him were to ask, where is this guy? You were to say, he has entered my house, he's hiding at a place. Because deontologists believe if something is wrong, it is wrong in and of itself, regardless of what outcome, regardless of its outcome. Now, the opposite is consequentialist, and I believe that all things are moral because they have some good. So if an action generates some good, then it is a moral thing. And if it generates a bad thing, a bad outcome, then it is an immoral thing. So that is usually a rough basic way of determining what is moral or what is not. I don't know who asked that question, but it's a very long answer to what you asked. It's also helpful for this particular course. Now, we've looked at various understandings of law. So maybe the last understanding of law presumes that law essentially has some correlation with culture, which means any mechanism of ordering society is a form of law, provided that people consider it to be compulsive. In other words, if you believe that a particular Holy Spirit or a particular custom or a particular practice or behave in a particular manner, and that is law. This kind of thinking is responsible for the consideration of customary law as law in the Kenyan legal space. Now, let's look at the nature of law before we look at the various theories. So, what separates law from other things? What separates law from other?
Dr. Gira, before we go to the nature of law, allow me to interject a little bit. And my comment goes to that initial question you asked about inheritance. And we saw how many students were reasoning. Most of them preferred to follow the law. Even though because they didn't understand that part of the law that you cannot benefit from your unlawful actions like killing another. So in that sense, I feel I just want to, even as we go to the nature of law, most of you who thought that you needed to follow the law, irrespective of its or irrespective of whether it will lead to a just consequence or a moral consequence, shows that you're already positivists. You believe in following the rules to the latter. And those of you who are accommodative, meaning you're willing to bring other factors into your consideration, because the rule that you're told is that succession law allows for, says that a will must be followed. But there are those who, even though knowing that a rule must be followed, you're willing to bring extraneous. It might not be a just moral to allow a grandson who has killed their father to inherit all his wealth. So you can already see yourself leaning on the natural school of thought, like you want to bring other extraneous characteristics to what a rule should have, not just that it is a rule and it should be followed. So that was interesting to observe, because the reasoning behind your positions were correct for those who wanted to follow the law, but the ones who also didn't, who were willing to tweak their position, shows how you're already inclined to the natural school of thought, and they're thinking about what a law should be and whether people should even rebel against laws that don't make sense. So that's going to come out as Dr. Ngira elaborates some more. Then finally, another final comment on that is now it helps you. Remember, most of you here in class, when you are about to sit for your exam, I always have 10% of the class coming to me and telling me that they have not met the attendance threshold, but they want me to allow them to sit for the exam. So what are you asking me to do when you make such a request? The rule of Strathmore University is clear that you should have attained a certain percentage of attendance to be allowed to sit for the exam. So you're telling me to tweak the law. Why should I tweak? If I follow it to the latter, how does it apply to you? And if I tweak it, doesn't it negate the purpose of attending class? So those are the struggles and the controversies we have in these schools. It is not very clear cut as you think, but I will pass over to Dr. Ngira. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So we'll understand it more as we proceed with the nature of law, and finally wind up with the various theoretical perspectives. So, what separates law from other forms of normative order? There are different things that compel people to do certain things. School rules in class, and the rules of your parents at home, the rules of your church, the rules of your sports such as football. So, what is so unique about law? The first one is so sometimes when you talk about this principles. When we talk about the nature of law, we talk about what we call principles of legality. Beyond, so if you are in a criminal law class, you talk about it in a totally different context. So what exactly constitutes law? What requirements must a given rule meet before it meets the test of legality? So the first one is that law must be sufficiently general. In other words, law must, if you are making law for children, it must be all children. If you are making law for people with disability in Kenya, it must be for all people with disability. If you are making law for citizens, you cannot send them to wake up and say, I don't like these opposition politicians, I'll make a law to target these opposition politicians. Or I don't like these people with disabilities in Mombasa, I will make a law simply to target them, unless you are making law within Mombasa County. But the requirement is that law must be general enough. Now, this helps in two ways. One, it treats everybody equally, but also two, it makes it possible to tailor the law to given situations. If you are too definite in the law, then the consequence is that it may be impossible to tailor this law to each unique situation. And you may need to make up a new law every time a new situation comes up. Number two is that law must be clear and unambiguous. So law must be very clear and unambiguous. This helps in interpretation. You've seen all these discussions about shall and will and gender and so on, and two-thirds gender rule. They rise because of this issue. Now, the other is it is difficult to make a law totally clear and totally unambiguous. This is the requirement that it is very difficult to make, because law uses words, and words are generally ambiguous. If I come to you and say, I visited Mercy and she cooked very nice food, you may not really understand what I mean, because if Mercy had cooked pizza, my mother would not think that is nice food. Somebody in Westlands in Nairobi would think it is nice food. Somebody like me does not consider pizza to be a nice food. So what is nice food is relative to the individual and to the context. If you say, I met a really tall guy, what do you mean by tall varies. If the person is 6 inches or 10, or rather 6, 7, somebody will say really tall. Somebody will say, if the person is like 6, you would not see the person who is 7 as really, really tall. If you are 4, you say the person who is 7 or 6 is really, really tall. So, because words are in and of themselves indeterminate, it follows that it is very difficult to kind of make law as clear as possible. Let me give you an example. Let's say a law prohibits sleeping in a train station. So the law says, do not sleep in a train station. And if you sleep in a train station, you'll be arrested and prosecuted. But on this particular night, the police are doing patrols around the train station. This is a common law for many, train stations, especially in Europe. And then the police are doing patrols, and they find 2 people in that train station. One person carried a mattress, brought it to the train station, lay like he was a homeless man. He carried a mattress, he brought it to the station, he lay on the mattress, but he did not close his eyes. His eyes were wide open, and he was awake, but he was lying on the mattress. The second person was someone who was waiting for a train, but he dozed off. He was seated, he dozed off. And the police just came in when he got dozed off. So he was basically, you would say, asleep. Who had violated this law? Is it the homeless man who didn't have anywhere to sleep and came with his mattress to the train station, lay on the mattress, but did not close his eyes, was wide awake? Or is it the person who dozed off? What do you guys think? Let me pick randomly. Ian Kainan. Who violated this law?
Both of them, I guess.
Both of them. Sichangi, I'm seeing a hand up here. Chemiat Salome. Who violated this law?
Sorry, I forgot to lower my hand, but I didn't get the question.
The person who had dozed off while seated in the train station, and the homeless man who came with his mattress lay on the mattress but did not close his eyes. Who violated this law?
I just didn't get the whole thing. Maybe ask somebody else. Sorry.
So now the point is that to determine who violated that law, you need to understand or give meaning to the word sleep. So that if that law is to make sense, then at the beginning of that law, the word sleep must be defined. So that would meet the test of clarity and ambiguity. Now, the other thing is, the other one, number 3, is that law must act prospectively. What that means is that law must act prospectively and not retrospectively. What that means is law would become active prospectively and not retrospectively. What that means is law would become active from the day it is enacted onwards, not backwards. If a law is enacted today against a particular practice, then those who committed that action yesterday would not be considered to have offended that law. That law would have been offended by those who violate it from tomorrow onwards. So we say law does not act backwards, it acts forward. Law does not act prospectively. Sorry, law acts prospectively and not retrospectively. Although, and I must add this, sometimes the law may actually state that it can act backwards. There's a law that investigates historical injustices. It will say that it will investigate historical injustices from this point to this point. Now, such kind of law would act fairly backwards, but up to a particular time that is established in the law, in that particular law. But generally speaking, law acts from the day it is enacted onwards and not backwards. And the other thing is that law must be free from contradiction. In other words, you cannot make laws that contradict each other, because otherwise one of them would become invalid. And you know very well that if a law violates the Constitution, then it is invalid. So if you make laws that kind of contradict and violate each other, then that law would be invalid. Now, any question up to that point before we proceed? Any question? Let me see.
Okay, we have Jerry Benjamin Avugaha. Jerry.
Avaga.
Thanks.
Okay. In such a scenario, wouldn't you have take into consideration the intent? Because was didn't mean to went there with the motive to sleep.
We can't hear you properly.
That makes
I don't know if it is Jerry's if it is Jerry's connection. Jerry will really like to hear from you. We'll give you a chance. I don't know if we are losing you because of connection. Come again, please.
Okay.
Sorry, Jerry. There's a connection challenge.
Question.
Oh. Okay.
Okay. We'll proceed then. You can ask that
But
question.
Jerry, please text. It seems we can't hear you because of
Chairman,
connection. Come again. Oh, okay. We've lost you, Jerry. We have lost you. Please text on the chat, right on the chat.
Okay. I'll run through the rest so that in the interest of time. So the other one is that law must be officially promulgated. It must be somehow, it must be published. So law only becomes active once it is gazetted. So that gazette is the process of official promulgation. There must be some way in which law is made officially public. We say it must be officially promulgated. The way we officially gazette legislations. Now the other one is that law must not ask the impossible. It must set realistic standards. Law should not ask you to do what is totally impossible to be done. It must, because otherwise, so many people would violate law, and there would be not enough reason to put them in. So law must ask what is possible to be done. For example, tax law cannot ask you to remit 90% of your salary as tax. You just won't, right? So law must ask you to do that which is humanly possible, so that you should not struggle too much to meet the test, because otherwise people just widely violate law. It must ask that which can possibly be done. Now the other one is that law must be fairly constant. It must not be subject to random and frequent change, which means you cannot make law today, you change it tomorrow, you make it the other day, you change it. So law must not be made and changed randomly. Now the other one is law must be implemented in a way that is consistent with its wording. Law must be implemented or enforced in a way that is consistent with its wording. Which means that at least there must be an attempt to enforce the law as it is. In other words, you cannot make the law saying X and then you enforce Y. You have to try and enforce that which is in the words. I think those are eight principles of legality of law. So if a rule meets those tests at the very basic level, it meets the test of what would constitute law. There are 8, right?
Yeah.
Now we know the nature of law, and we know the various definitions of law. Now there are various theories that try to explain what law is and what law should do. I think Mercy had talked about when I came into the class when we were talking about natural law, right?
Yeah, yes.
So I'll assume that you already covered that, I presume.
No, we were just kicking off, by the way, David. If you could please start from there.
Okay. So these are general principles of law, the ones that we just discussed. Now, there are various scholars, just like in every discipline. If you study chemistry, there are certain theories in chemistry. If you study business, the various components of business would have different. So you have different theories of management, different theories of institutions, different theories of economics, and so on. So in the same way, there are different theories of law, and they try to explain the nature of law and the functions of law in society. Now, one of the earliest school is called natural law. Now, natural law is associated with so many scholars, and we can't discuss many of them, but one of them is called St. Augustine of Hippo. Another one is called Aquinas, Cicero, and many others. You don't need all these names, though. You just need to know, because you're not, people who will be examined in terms of the names. You need to know to understand natural law. Now, natural law proceeds from the assumption that there is a direct correlation between law and morality. In other words, there is an extent to which some level of morality is implicit in the law. That if you are making law, then you are bound by some level of morality. That means you have to make moral laws. And in that context, there is a whole debate that leads up to what we are discussing, and that whole debate about the history of natural law is irrelevant. So we'll just look at the general principles of natural law. One is that there are certain things in society that are moral, and there are certain things that are immoral, and that morality binds the lawmaking process. In other words, when you are making law, you are bound by certain moral principles. Two is that certain moral principles are universal. So you are bound by universal moral principles. These universal moral principles are determined by our obligation to do good and avoid evil. So we have a certain moral obligation to do good things and avoid bad things, to avoid evil and do good. Now, natural lawyers then argue that there is a connotation between a direct correlation between law and justice. And if you are studying Roman law, you then learn that in Roman understanding of law, the word law would come from what we call ius, which has an English variation of jus or juris, both of which mean either law or justice. So in the Roman understanding, law in Latin, so ius is Latin. These are English derivatives of the Latin word ius. So in Roman understanding, I bet you know all the history about Rome and Roman Empire and stuff like that. Law was equivalent to justice in meaning and equivalent to right, as in a human right. So the consequence of this understanding of law is that the Romans would see the concept of law as being equivalent to the concept of justice. So that what was law was essentially what was just. Now, this was different because from decrees, so there is what we call lex. Lex is a proclaimed law, like a written law. So lex does not necessarily have a connotation with justice. It doesn't have a link with justice. But lex was like decrees of Roman emperors. So a lex, in the current setting, a lex would be a statute or a constitution. It is a declared law, a proclaimed law. And the concept of law in the abstract sense denotes some level of justice, denotes some level of right. So natural law scholars, beginning from the Greek philosophers to Roman philosophers today, believe that there should be a direct correlation between what is just and what is law, and what is fair and what is right. And that is why when I ask you about the case of Palma, Riggs versus Palma, some of you are saying, oh, we need to look at the most moral thing to do in this instance, regardless of what the law says. When you begin to talk like that, and Mercy already emphasized this, then you are beginning to establish a direct correlation between what is just and what is law and what is moral. Because what is just essentially amounts to what is moral in this particular context. So a lot of scholars would then argue that kings and queens and citizens and presidents and all of us have an obligation to act in a moral way, which is equivalent to in a just way. And that essentially is the legal, should be the legal position. Now, these scholars proceed to tell us that we have then an obligation to obey just laws and to disobey unjust laws. Because you are meant to disobey unjust laws, because they are not laws. Because what qualifies a rule to be law in the eyes of natural law scholars is its connection with justice and morality. What that means is, if a law fails the test of justice and morality, then it has failed the test of law. Therefore, we have no obligation to obey it. Or in some more ruthless fashion, we have an obligation to disobey it. Now, some more nuanced scholars like Martin Luther King think otherwise. Martin Luther King could have been said to have been a natural scholar. You know Martin Luther King. The one of I Have a Dream. Now, King, and you can go read that letter to Birmingham, letter from Birmingham prison. You can Google it, it's available online, letter from Birmingham prison, where he wrote to priests and bishops and so on of Birmingham about the situation of the Black people in the United States. Now, he raised a very interesting perspective about natural law. That if you disobey an unjust law with the intention of raising awareness about the injustice in that law, and you accept to suffer the consequences for violating that law, then essentially you have obeyed that law. If you disobey, because St. Augustine of Hippo and John Locke, and we'll talk about John Locke shortly, think that you have no obligation to obey unjust law. Because, and to some extent, some other scholars, I teach jurisprudence, I mention a lot of them, but don't worry about the so many names. You can remember St. Augustine and John Locke. So, a lot of these natural scholars believe that you have no obligation to obey an unjust law or an immoral law, because immorality is an inherent component of law. So that if a law misses the component of morality, it is not law, you don't need to obey. Now, Martin Luther King thinks otherwise, because he says that if you disobey an unjust law with the intention of raising awareness about the injustice in that law, and you accept punishment for that disobedience, then you have really obeyed the idea of law. Because Martin Luther King believes that if you go by the St. Augustine idea that you disobey unjust law, then you end up in a situation of anarchy. So he believes you disobey and accept punishment for that law. It is like you decide that you want to organize a demonstration. The police tells you will not organize a demonstration to criticize government. And if you try, we will arrest you. And you've seen that happening in this country all the time. And people go demonstrate and they sit there and wait for the police to arrest them. Those people are doing what Martin Luther King was saying. You are disobeying an unjust law, and you want to show people how unjust this law is, and you accept to be arrested. Remember, maybe most of you are not born. When Wangari Maathai went to demonstrate over the construction of a skyscraper at Uhuru Park, she went to demonstrate, she stripped naked, and she stayed there and she said, "You can come and arrest me." I think a tree was planted in her honor. So she basically did what Martin Luther King was saying. Now the question is, in logical terms, is it possible to obey law and disobey it at the same time? What do you guys think? Does accepting punishment for disobeying an unjust law amount to obeying the unjust law? That is the question I'm asking.
That is a highly philosophical one, Dr. Ngira. Please repeat again. Even me, I'm just trying to absorb it.
If you disobey an unjust law and you accept the punishment imposed on you for the disobedience, have you obeyed the unjust law?
Okay, I think I may end up accepting a punishment, not just because I'm obeying, but because of fear of the power wielder. For instance, I can be arrested by the police for not tying my seatbelt. Okay, that is not even a law. That maybe that is too shallow. But let's say I'm arrested. I'm protesting about payment of taxes, and I evade payment of taxes. And I just submit so that I may not have, because the government wields a lot of power, so that I may not suffer even more severe penal consequences, something of that sort. So you might not just submit because now you feel it is a law you need to submit, but because of fear or other factors coming into play. I will allow Rebecca as well to give us her comment, please.
I have a question though. Like, is just it's just my thoughts, but like, is law equal to justice? In that case, because like you have something, let's say even like something like slavery that's stipulated, and let's say you're really against it, right? Um, but then disobeying it would be going against the law, whether it's just or unjust. And then also, like, in my thoughts, I don't think law is equal to justice, I guess. So I think that disobeying the law is disobeying the law. It's not, you're doing the just thing, but you're still disobeying the law at the end of the day. My
All
thoughts,
right.
yeah.
Thank you, Rebecca. Shannon Munjera.
Okay. Yeah, so for me, I think you won't actually be obeying the law by disobeying it and then suffering the consequences of it, because the consequence is already tied to the law itself. So if you go ahead and disobey it, you're disobeying the whole thing because the consequence is already tied to the law. So I think you'll just be showing now the effect of the injustice of the law by disobeying it. Yeah.
Now there is an interesting case usually cited as Somerset versus Stewart. Somerset versus Stewart. Let me type it. I'll have to push this. Somerset versus Stewart. Someone has just reminded me about this case. Now, so someone has just raised a question of slavery being legal but not being just. Now, you've spoken more like a judge, a very old, a 17th century British judge called Lord Mansfield. So this case concerned a slave, a black man who was a slave. He was to be transferred into the Caribbean, to Jamaica, and so on. But his slave master first took him to England before being transferred to Jamaica. So he worked for him in England. But now, this slave, Somerset, refused to be transferred to Jamaica because he argued that the laws in England were, because it was illegal to make an Englishman a slave. So no British would be made a slave by virtue of human rights and so on and so on. Somerset was a slave. So what slave owners used to do is to escape England. So they would take slaves from Africa and take them to the Caribbean without setting foot in England. So that then the laws in England would not, in their view, have applied to these slaves. And this was a time when law was not very much developed, like 17th century, way back. But Somerset was in England. So he argued that he cannot be transferred to the Caribbean because he is a human being like other British people, and therefore he is protected by liberty and rights and so on. Therefore, he cannot be forced into labor against his will. The case came before Lord Mansfield. And Lord Mansfield noted, because the way common law works is if he ruled in favor of Somerset, then essentially that would mark the beginning of the end of slave trade. Because what would happen is slaves would have to bring this kind of cases against their masters. And there were so many in England around this time. So Mansfield told Stewart and Somerset, and Stewart being the slave master, to try and resolve this matter. But then they failed too. Mansfield then came up with the adage or clause that justice must be done, though heaven shall fall. What this means is, even if heaven is to come down, justice must be done. So in this case, law was totally inconsistent with justice. Because if Mansfield was to set aside, okay, law was to some degree consistent with justice, to the extent that it prohibited enslavement of human beings. But that law was again inconsistent with justice because it allowed enslavement of black people. So it was unjust to the extent that it protected white people and allowed black people to be enslaved. So the problem then was so that was the law was discriminative, was unfair, was unjust. Mansfield was more committed to justice in the sense that you were speaking. I don't know who was asking this question. And then Mansfield said justice in that broader sense must be done even if heaven was to fall down. That means even if law was inconsistent with justice, then judges had no obligation to abide by that law because they had a higher commitment to justice and a commitment to the law. And so what I'm trying to say is there is not always a consistency between law and justice. Sometimes law can be used to perpetuate an injustice. And in that case, the question comes in when judges are faced with a scenario that there is law, there is justice. And the question is whether you stick to the law or stick to justice. Mansfield chose to stick to justice. I hope that answers your question. So in the broader sense, in a summary, natural law, without getting into the various complicated classical and critical discussions, argue that there must be a correlation between law and justice, and that we have no obligation to obey a law that is manifestly unjust because it fails the tenets of law, and that nobody should be punished for disobeying an unjust law. That would provide for us a summary of natural law. Any question up to that point? Good. Now, the next school is what we call legal positivism. Now, legal positivism is the exact opposite of natural law because legal positivism proceeds from the assumption that law is that which is written and proclaimed. So that once law is written and proclaimed, judges and citizens have an obligation to comply with that, regardless of its connection with morality or justice. In other words, if it is an unjust law, implement it. Doesn't matter how unjust it is, because law must not necessarily have any connotation or correlation with justice. Law, justice, or morality. Law is law. So judges should simply implement, or rather interpret law as it is and have it enforced in that particular way, without any reference to morality, justice, or human rights, or whatever. Of course, positivists would have rejected Lord Mansfield's decision in this case. Lord Mansfield's decision set about actions that eventually led to the collapse of slave trade. So positivists believe that only written laws are laws, of constitutions, statutes, secondary legislations, conventions, treaties are laws. Anything else, morality, customs, culture, those ones are not laws. Justice, they would accept justice as law if that law encompasses justice in itself. But if it violates justice, positivists would still see that law as being valid. So they believe that we have an obligation to obey all laws, including unjust. Let me give you an example. Dating back to about 1945. So sometimes in 1945, the case is usually called the grudge informer case. So this woman was married to you know all these stories about World War. So this woman was married to a World War soldier, a German soldier fighting in World War. Now, during this period, there was a law that you cannot criticize the Hitler government. If you criticize government, you are arrested, you are taken to court, sentenced to death. So this guy was fighting in the war. He was given some leave, a few weeks leave to go home. When he went home, he talked to his wife and he told his wife the situation in the war is bad. Hitler is killing people, and millions of Jews have been killed, and so on and so on. He basically criticized government. So his wife Now, part of the law, this law also requires that if you hear somebody criticizing government, you are under an obligation to report. And if you don't report, then you've also committed an offense. You are also sentenced to death for failing to report that somebody has criticized government. So then everybody, even if the person was your wife, your child, your daughter, your whoever, and he criticizes government, you have to report the person. If you don't report, you've committed an offense. So this woman overhears the husband criticize. The husband, of course, was speaking to her and telling her how he was fed up with the war. They were killing people and he didn't like it and blah blah blah. And so the wife went to report to the government, and the man was arrested. He was taken. His leave was cut short. He was taken to court, found guilty, and because they needed people to fight in the war, they couldn't kill him. They said, took him back to the war and put him on the front line, and so that he would be killed. The presumption was that in the front line of the war, he would definitely die. All his future leaves, of course, were cancelled until the end of the war. Now, somehow, this guy didn't die. He survived the war. He came back, and of course, now he found the wife. Now he reported the wife to the police. It follows that in Germany, there was a law that prohibited, I think even in Kenya, prohibited denying somebody his liberty. So the man went to the police to report, and the actions of the wife had resulted in him being denied his liberty. So the wife was arrested. And the wife said in his defense that he was complying with the law. What would you say if you are the judge? Bashir, what would you say if you are the judge? Ngugi John.
Hello? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you very well.
Okay. I wanted to ask, okay, is this before or after the war ended?
This was after the war had ended, Hitler had been defeated, and now the man came back. Of course, after the war, now the man came back, and Hitler had been defeated, and Nazi Party had been removed from power, and now there was a new dispensation.
Okay, so in that case, I think the man isn't guilty because the actions of the woman is okay. You see, what the wife did was under different conditions because at the time, yes, what she was doing was in the law, but now after the Nazis were defeated, Nazism was abolished, and so I don't think in that case now the wife's actions are wrong. In that case, she should be persecuted by the judge, not for denying freedom, but for supporting Nazism.
Mm-hmm. What do the others think? Why Vivian Wangui? Okay. This woman was, of course, found guilty and sent to prison. And this generated a lot of discussions in jurisprudence and philosophy of law. Because the argument of the judges was that these laws were so immoral and so unjust that they were not laws, and therefore there was no obligation to comply with them. That was the position of natural law scholars. Positivists say that however unjust they were, however immoral they were, they had been validly passed by parliament in Germany, and therefore everybody was under an obligation to comply with them. So somebody cannot be punished for complying with law. But what we are saying in our positivist understanding is that positivists believe law is that which is written, that which is promulgated, and once that is done, then we have to comply with it. One of the most pronounced positivist scholars is a guy called John Austin. We won't talk about many of them. We will only talk about Austin. There are so many of them. Now, Austin argues that law is a command from the sovereign backed by sanction. So that if you interpret sovereign to mean government, the law is a command from government to citizens backed by some threat or coercion. Full stop. There is no moral, philosophical dimension as to the content of this particular law. Okay. Now that is it about positivism. You know the basics of positivism. Now the other school of jurisprudence.
David, Dr.
Yeah.
Gira, please, you can start another page for the white wall so that at least the student you can have room to type.
Okay. So
to write in case you need to write.
Is that what I did? You know, we don't use this. We use Teams. So it is my first time trying to use this wall on this.
So just a new one. Is there a place where you can start running, or you can move these letters to the end, and then you can have a bit of room to type? Yeah, that's a new box. You can move it to into place.
It doesn't seem to be moving. How do I come up with a new one? Is it done with that? So even if I do that, there is no problem. Okay. So any question about positivism before we move to the next school?
Yes, I do have a short one. And I want to thank the students. I know time is fast spent. Lakini hang in there. We are positivist and there are a few more, and then we'll be able to wind up on this discussion. I've always, what is the place of positivists currently? Because positivists came and rubbished the natural school and their thoughts. You know, the famous quote by Jeremy Bentham, nonsense upon stilts, yeah? And they came up so strongly and criticized this, that a rule should be moral, it should be just, and they criticize the scholars in there. But I've always asked myself, what is the position of positivists currently as we speak? Are they as popular? Have there other challenges that positivism has faced as a school of thought?
Now, the positivists went ahead to give us a current movement called formalism. A lot of people who identify as positivists usually identify as formalists. Now, the formalists are essentially positivists because they believe that the role of curing the absurdities in the law and the anomalies in the law and the injustice and immorality in the law is not the role of courts. It is the role of parliament. So, however immoral a law is, it has to be applied like that. But the issue then that positivists try to argue, if you allow judges to apply their own sense of morality on the law, then you cannot control what they do because then it makes nonsense of the law in the words of Bentham. Because then there is no law. Because I mean, if you say these are rules, but you can also act outside, then you cannot dictate what is outside. So you could actually make the situation worse since you've allowed the judge to act outside the law. The presumption when the judge acts outside, he will always act in the interest of the parties or in the interest of justice is rejected by formalists. And they believe that if you allow judges to act outside the law, they could actually end up with worse. You could actually end up with worse outcomes than if you were to contain them in the law. So the debate has now taken more like formalists and another school called realists debate, which we're not going to talk about right now. But yeah, it is very lively. It's still alive right now. I don't know whether that answers your question. Hello? 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 Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Mercy asked a question and disappeared. Okay, so we proceed. So having this post of positivism and natural law, the other school is what we call sociological jurisprudence. Now, sociological jurisprudence see law as emerging from society. The law is that which society see as law. If you are a Kamba and you subscribe to Kamba culture, then that Kamba culture partly constitutes your law. So law comes from society. Law is not created by any organ such as government. Law is not necessarily created by moral considerations. Law is that which society see as law. What that means is there is a possibility that society may actually consider wrong things, rather immoral things. But to the extent that society believes that they're part of their customs and belief systems, they are laws. So sociological jurisprudence is responsible for the existence of customary law as a branch of law. So in a nutshell, that is sociological jurisprudence. It's associated with quite a number of scholars, ranging from a man called Emile Durkheim, French scholar, to Roscoe Pound. Wait a minute, let me see if I can work on this other side. Roscoe Pound to Eugene Ellick. Now, sociological theories also argue that law is an instrument of social change. That if you want to change something in society, then you will use the law. But they also argue that that is a wrong way of doing it, because they argue that law should follow change. In other words, things should change first, and then the law should anchor that change, rather than law being used to change things, because there is a possibility of people rejecting that change. And Eugene Ellick specifically gives us an example from Bukovina. Bukovina was it's pronounced as Bukovina, but written as Bukowina. Bukovina was because W in German and in the Dutch is pronounced as V. So in Bukovina, there was a practice. There was no law prohibiting, like state law prohibiting employing children. But the people of Bukovina prohibited paying money to children. So if you had a child working for you, you couldn't, as a matter of customs of the people of Bukovina, you could not pay the child. So you had to pay the parent of the child. But state law did not allow that, because state law would only allow you to pay the person who has worked. You cannot pay a person B for the work done by person A. So in that context, Eugene Ellick is saying that the state law is actually superimposing itself against the law, what he calls the living law of the people of Bukovina. And the living law of the people of Bukovina here is that children cannot be paid. It doesn't matter how bad that feels. It doesn't matter how evil it feels to give the money belonging to children to their parents. The law in Bukovina village prohibits giving money to children, and the state should respect that. But on the other hand, state law thinks that giving money belonging to party A to another party essentially amounts to property rights violation, labor law violation. So, Ehrlich argues that in every society there are living laws. Living laws are the laws that exist among the people in that society. They do not emerge from the state, nor are they enforced by the state. They are enforced through self-coercion by members of society as they go about their daily businesses. So the living law essentially emerges from all this sociological jurisprudence about law, about the correlation between law and culture. Sociological jurists also argue that there is a that law is an instrument of social control. That law is used as a mechanism for controlling society, and that law is also a mechanism for organizing society. That law organizes structures of society. Now you remember our system's definition of law. Our system's definition of law comes from sociological jurisprudence. Because sociological jurisprudence sees law as part of a broader social system. And they go beyond that point because they also see law as being part of an institutional framework, so that law is seen as a complete institution in of itself. Any question up to that point? Nancy, which school did we also do you want us to cover? There are so many of them, like 10 plus.
No, you can't finish all of them. The final one that I will request we cover a little bit, and that will mark as you close the discussion, is the Marxist. Just because I am a big fan of Marxist, Karl Marx.
Okay.
And as we do that, I want to encourage the students I want to take attendance for this meeting. Please write your surname, and admission number, or admission number. Write your admission number and surname. Admission number and surname. Just wait for my text. Alafu you write admission number and surname. Okay, thank you.
Marxist jurisprudence comes from the philosophy of a guy called Karl Marx. And sometimes when students say they are tired of studying, they get shocked because Karl Marx was so many things at the same time. Karl Marx was a philosopher, Karl Marx was a historian, Karl Marx was a legal scholar, Karl Marx was an economist, Karl Marx was a sociologist. So you possibly have only one degree that you've not finished, and some of you are already saying that tired. You can't get tired when Karl Marx was a scholar in 5 things. And he's cited in all these authorities. So Marx was at the very beginning, Marx was a law student in Berlin. Now, back in the days, there was a forest in Berlin where Marx would fetch firewood for heating the house during winter. One day, Marx went to fetch firewood, and he realized that the whole place had been fenced off by land grabbers or capitalists who had bought the land from the state, and now you had to buy the firewood from them. So Marx then dropped from law school and began a Marxist revolution against these capitalists who kind of bought land. So it was not a military revolution, but an ideological revolution. And so this gave rise to the idea of Marxism. There is a whole story that I've dropped due to time. Now, Marx didn't work. Throughout his life, Marx did not necessarily work. He used to write for journals, for newspapers with his friend Angel, because Marx felt that the production system, what we call capitalist production system. You possibly know this. You're a business student, so you know capitalist production system. The capitalist production system is based on certain things. 1, maximization of profit. 2, minimization of losses. 3, exploitation of workers. Now, these 3 principles essentially resulted into a situation where the capitalist production system resulted into exploitation of workers. So Marx decided it will never work because in this context, we will always be exploited. Marx's position was that, for instance, profit is a form of exploitation. So when you make profit, because he argued that in an ideal situation, and I know you know this possibly better than me because you've studied economics, the input, what you input into the business, should be equivalent into the production system. I was talking about industrial production. Should be equivalent to what comes out. So that if you input 1 million, what comes out should be worth 1 million. Now, if it is worth 1.5 million, then what happens is you have exploited those workers. Because if you are baking bread, you cannot alter the cost of bread once you bought it. You could not alter the cost of water or baking flour or any ingredient. So the reason why you invested 1 million and got 1.5 is because you exploited the workers. And how did you exploit them? By underpaying them. So if out of the 1 million you paid them 300,000 and you still made a profit of 500,000, it means the cost of their labor was 300,000 plus 500,000. So what you ended up with as profit emerges from exploitation of workers. So in this regard, because businesses and companies and industries were bound to make profit anyway, Marx just refused to work on this basis. And nobody would employ him anyway because of this views that were seen to be inconsistent with the capitalist production system. Now, Marx argued a society was categorized into two groups of people. He calls bourgeoisie. I don't know whether I got the spelling wrong. You can double check the spelling. I don't know. It's long since I spelled this. Okay, it's a French word. You could check out the spelling on proletariat. Now, the bourgeoisie are the owners of factors of production. I think the bourgeoisie, I don't know how it should be written like that. We'll double check the spelling of bourgeoisie. Now, the bourgeoisie are the owners of factors of production. And you know, factors of production are land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship. So the bourgeoisie control the four. The proletariats and the powerless people in society. That the workers, the poor, powerless people in society. Now, these proletariats are owned by the bourgeoisie because, as we say, the bourgeoisie owned land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship. Now, because they own labor, the proletariats provide labor, it follows that the bourgeoisie own my asshole the whole time. Proletariat. So if Chelsea, the owner of Chelsea, decides to sell Chelsea, he sells Chelsea plus the players. So the players are the proletariats here, and the owner is the bourgeoisie. So if you sell a company, you're selling plus everything. So the company shifts in terms of ownership. So the proletariats, because the bourgeoisie owns them, it follows that because the bourgeoisie owns labor, it follows that the bourgeoisie owns the providers of labor who are the proletariats. Now, Marx proceeded then to tell us, having seen the society as organized in this way, that there is an inherent power struggle between bourgeoisie and proletariat, with the proletariat seeking to overthrow the bourgeoisie and the bourgeoisie seeking to entrench more control of the proletariat, because that results in the maximization of profit that we saw later on. Now, within this whole framework lies the law. So Marx sees the law as being an instrument of class domination in so many ways. One is the law protects property rights. Now, by protecting property rights, the law protects those who have from those who have not. In other words, for your phone to be stolen, you must first have a phone. So then the law, in the eyes of Marx, and there are all these criticism against this theory, and we can't do that. But the law protects those who have property from those who do not have. Because Marx, if you study criminology, Marx sees crime as a process of redistributing wealth in society. Now, for wealth to be redistributed, then that means some people must have more wealth than others. So the law protects the rich people from poor people who would want to redistribute that particular wealth. The challenge is then he sees crime as being a product of poverty, which is not necessarily the case all the time. Because, like, for instance, in Kenya, the biggest thieves are then the richest, not necessarily the poorest. But that is a different discourse altogether. So Marx sees law as being an instrument of class domination. By protecting the capitalist system of production and anchoring it, the law continues a system of maximization of profit, minimization of losses, exploitation of workers. Now, the law also protects those value systems that are central to the survival of the bourgeoisie. So there are certain things that are prohibited in society. Not necessarily, they do not necessarily have an economic connotation, but because the bourgeoisie have value systems that go beyond economy, it follows that those things that are prohibited by law are the things that are disliked by the bourgeoisie. alcohol, they make it illegal. If they like it, they allow it. If the bourgeoisie dislike bang, they make it illegal. If they don't like it, or if they like it, they allow it. So whatever is allowed in society emerges from the interest of the bourgeoisie. And some Marxist feminists argue that there is a correlation between Marxist understanding of bourgeoisie and feminism. So feminists see men as being the bourgeoisie, so that what men don't like become illegal, what men like become acceptable. But then in the Marxist context, we're not talking about feminist Marxist now. The Marxist context, the law is used to actually protect the value systems of the bourgeoisie. But at the root of all the value systems of the bourgeoisie lie economic considerations. So be it religion, be it family, be it whatever you want to talk about, all value systems in society have their base in economy. And that these value systems are protected by the law. So the law protects merit, and the law protects education and sees education as a mechanism of merit, and therefore the law as a mechanism of merit, and merit as being an entry point in the labor market. And underlying all that lies the question of money. So you must have some money to access education, get the merit, and enter the labor market. So what I'm trying to say is, what Marx believes in is the entire value system that is protected by law reflects the interests of the bourgeoisie indirectly. But more directly, that by protecting property rights and by prohibiting theft and so on, the law essentially protects the bourgeoisie from the proletariat. The law becomes an instrument of class domination. And lastly, the crimes that are associated with the bourgeoisie, white collar crimes, are usually more complex, more difficult to investigate, more difficult to prosecute. So the net effect is that very few bourgeoisie end up in prison. Crimes committed by proletariats are highly criminalized, have long sentences, easy to investigate, easy to prosecute. So the end result is that there are more proletariats in prison. So the entire legal system is a system of class domination by the bourgeoisie over the proletariats. And these bourgeoisie are represented in various sectors. So they have the representative in religion, they have the representative in politics, they have the representative in parliament, and in all sectors of society. All of them work together to maintain a capitalist system of production. But underlying all this struggle lies the question of law. And so society can only be changed when there is social and legal reforms. Thank you so much. I think that is my last sentence.
Wow, David. Thank you so much. When I invited you to be a guest speaker as well, I thought to myself, while David is speaking to my students, I will go and do A, B, C, D. But since you started speaking, I have hardly left my seat because I've also been reminded of why jurisprudence and what jurisprudence is all about. Thank you so much, David, for taking the time, the energy to come on a short notice and speak to our students. I hope this really shows the students that the effort that is being put for them to really get to understand these principles, especially when we interrogate the nature of law and the kind of rules we have in our society. Thank you so much, David. Perhaps, given that it's an online class, it is hard to invite each student to say something, but I would like to invite the class representatives if they're still here. I can see there's some who have already left. So if the class representative is still here, Roseanne, Rebecca, and the BTC one, they never got back to me. I don't know if they're in class, or I will have to elect a new BTC module leader. So can you just please, on behalf of your colleagues, make a few remarks to express our gratitude to our guest speaker this day? Thank you. So we'll start off with Roseanne.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Okay. I want to say thank you to the doctor for teaching us what he's taught us today. We've really learned a lot, and the the class was very interactive, which was very nice. So thank you.
Thank
you
you,
so much.
Rebecca.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to come and basically teach us these these categories of law. I've really appreciated and we've really learned a lot. Um, I think you should definitely come again. I think also the class has been super interactive, like with a lot of questions that are really making us think about not just what is law, but also how to apply it. So
Okay.
Oh, Rebecca, I don't know if we've lost you. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And even before Dr. Ngira responds, there has to be someone from BTC to speak, and it has to be a man because of the two-third gender rule. Can we have a volunteer male student of BTC express himself about what the value of the class has been to him? BTC? Okay. Khalid Abdi, oh, you've already identified yourself as ICS. I will find someone from BTC. Let me see.
I don't know if
Uh,
Cyril is around.
who?
Cyril.
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 Cyril
Yeah.
Bite, please. Where are you?
Is also the class prep. We are two of us.
Oh, so Nema, please. I wanted to have your number. But you can speak as well, please. And text me your number there on the chat.
Okay. I really loved this subject of today personally, and really enjoyed the topics on law. I've been considering to do law in IT and just law. And I can say that from today's interaction, even with you, Daktari, you've given me a positive attitude towards law. I have a cousin doing law. She's also in Strathmore Law School, and they've really complained about jurisprudence being hard. But from what you've explained, how you made us understand, even being an ICT class mostly, you've given us a positive attitude towards everything about law, and we really loved it. And I guess my class also loved it. I loved the engagement in class. It was such an epic moment. So thank you very much.
Well said, Gift. Asante sana. Since no man volunteered, David, you can see the problem that the society might soon face with the women taking over. Our time is now. Although I don't want to take that terrain with David, he will totally bash my arguments on women taking over the society and that. Thank you, David. In case you have any remarks, I will allow you to say it, and then I have like a 5 minutes video I want to play for my class as we close the discussion. Thank you.
I don't think I have much. It has been very nice to interact with this class, and yeah, I look forward to some other engagement at some point. If I make my mind up at some point to come to Strasbourg, then we can even be interacting more and more. So thank you very, very much. Yeah, looking forward to some. Even if we don't interact in the school context, we can always interact around. I'm common in academic spaces, so when you are common in academic spaces too, we can always interact. So thank you so much, and have a lovely evening.
Okay, thank you, David. Is it possible you stop sharing your screen, please, to allow me share this 5 minutes video? Please, David, hang in there. for the video. It's about Karl Marx, and Karl Marx is my favorite. He's one of my favorite legal theorists, economic theorists, as you name it, is everywhere. So, why is he everywhere? Let's ask myself. So I will share. No worries, don't worry. I will stop share your sharing by sharing my screen, which I already have. So I'll share my desktop.
I have stopped sharing, right?
Yeah, it's okay. I've even stopped it from sharing. So please hang in there. I know you're tired. You want to go away, but hang in there. The best is always saved for the last. Max.
Before all the controversy and threats of boycotting by the sport's biggest stars, all of this started as an idea in the mind of this man.
You'll be surprised to learn how Karl Marx is so famous in China until China donated what do you call it? A statue of Karl Marx made of pure bronze to the small town where he was born in Germany. I might not be sharing my name with you now. Let me share my sound as well. I will stop the share and reshare so that I can share the sound and you can listen to the video. Share again. Share sound. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Sorry, should have specified. Okay. Don't worry, it's not the 30-minute one. But I will encourage you to. These documentaries usually reveal a part of the history that reading does not bring to life. Okay. Just a quick minute. What will Karl Marx say if you use Marx?
The 1, 2, 3.
I know one of you already told me to install.
These 3 young men have traveled a long way to be close to their idol. The German city of Trier, where Karl Marx was born, has become a place of pilgrimage for Chinese tourists.
He was the pioneer of communism. Many Chinese admire him. Yeah.
The Chinese government would like to give this Marx statue, reaching more than 6 meters tall, to the city of Trier to honor the 200th anniversary of Marx's birth. The design, made by the well-known sculptor Professor Wu Wei-shan, impressed Trier's mayor. I was thrilled when I saw the quality of the artwork that Professor Wu wants to give us. It has nothing to do with the typical Stalinist representations, which have somewhat influenced our view of Karl Marx. But he had planned to accept it without consulting Trier's residents, and it's too much for them. It's too big, it doesn't suit Trier. There's not an appropriate spot. Smaller would be better. For me, it's nothing more than a personality cult. It's just another advertisement that Trier can use for its commercial interests. People living in Trier, the oldest city in Germany, are proud of other things. For instance, the oldest well-preserved Roman city gate, the Porta Nigra, or the important Christian pilgrimage site, St. Matthias's Abbey, where the Apostle Matthias is buried. To help city residents gain an impression of how large the gift from China actually is,
this is a video I was searching for, to be honest. I was playing the other one to give me time to. This is the end of it. Thank you for hanging in there. You can leave at your own pleasure. I can see half of you have already gone. Oh, you missed my video on Karl Marx. I'll show the video next class. There's no way you can miss the video on Karl Marx. Even those who are running away will have to watch it in the next class. All right.